Advising the president yesterday as White House communications director. Instead, he was out after just 11 days on the job.
Here's what I will tell you, okay? I love the president.
We're going to stop the leaks, and if we don't stop the leaks, I'm going to stop you. It's just really that simple.
Well, I'm a Wall Street guy, and I'm more of a front-stabbing person, and I'd rather tell people directly how I feel about them.
If Reince wants to explain that he's not a leaker, let him do that.
Reince is a paranoid schizophrenic, paranoiac.
Putting Anthony Scaramucci in that job was like throwing a grenade into an ongoing civil war in the White House.
Tonight, standing in the pouring rain, President Trump announced that Reince Priebus, his chief of staff, is out.
This is an ABC News special report.
ABC News has learned that Anthony Scaramucci, the White House communications director who just started 10 days ago, is now leaving. And Anthony Scaramucci is right here, right now. Thank you for coming on This Week. First interview since you left the White House. I have to start with the president's statement yesterday. If you were White House communications director yesterday, would you advise he give that statement?
Well, I wouldn't have recommended that statement. I think he needed to be much harsher as it related to the white supremacists and the nature of that. I applaud General McMaster for calling it out for what it is. It's actually terrorism, and whether it's domestic or international terrorism, with the moral authority of the presidency, you have to call that stuff out.
The question is, why didn't the president do that? You know him well.
Well, I think Alex mentioned one of the reasons why he doesn't like doing that. He likes doing the opposite of what the media thinks he's going to do. I think he's also of the impression that there is hatred on all sides. But I disagree with it. And so, but here's the thing, whether I was the White House communications director or not, I don't think you're going to change the president. The president's going to do what he wants to do, how he wants to do it. But I think it's important for the people around him, George, to give them direct advice, to be blunt with him. I think he respects bluntness and he respects candor. And I certainly would have never suggested him doing that.
But is there anyone in the White House right now who said, boy, you just made a real mistake there?
I think people are probably reluctant to tell him the truth. Maybe Ivanka would do that. You saw her tweet this morning. Maybe Jared would do that. But you also got this sort of Bannon-Bart influence in there, which I think is a snag on the president. If the president really wants to execute that legislative agenda that I think is so promising for the American people, the lower middle class people and the middle class people, then he has to move away from that sort of Bannon-Bart nonsense.
You mean Bannon and Breitbart, Steve Bannon.
The whole thing is nonsensical. It's not serving the president's interest. He's got to move more into the mainstream. He's got to be more into where the moderates are and the independents are, George, that love the president. And so if he does that, he'll have a very successful legislative agenda that he'll be able to execute. And if he doesn't do that, you're going to see this inertia and you're going to see this resistance from more of the establishment senators that he needs to curry favor with.
Tough on Steve Bannon. Does he have to go?
Well, I think the president knows what he's going to do with Steve Bannon.
Which is what?
Well, let's leave it up to the president. It's his decision. But, I mean, at the end of the day, I think the president has a very good idea of who the leakers are inside the White House. The president has a very good idea of the people that are undermining his agenda that are serving their own interests.
They include Steve Bannon?
Well, yeah, like, look, I mean, we're not on a phone call and a tape phone call, and so we're on live television, and so I would prefer to let the president make the decisions that the president needs to make.
You mentioned that tape phone call. That may have been what got you fired from the White House. Let's show everybody what you said.
I'm not trying to strike the president, and Reince is paranoid schizophrenic, paranoiac. And what he's going to do is, maybe Bill Shine's coming. Let me leak thing and see if I can these people the way I Scaramucci for 6 months. Okay, the mooch showed up a week ago. This is going to get cleaned up very shortly, okay, because I nailed these guys. I got digital fingerprints on everything that they've done through the FBI and the Department of Justice. What's the thing? It's no. Oh, well, the felony, they're going to get prosecuted probably for the felony. They'll probably get prosecuted for that. Okay. Yeah. Wow. Detector stars. Yeah.
Of course, that was your conversation with Ryan Lizza of The New Yorker.
Which, for the record, I thought was off the record. And
but you didn't ask for it to be off the record.
I understand that, but this is the reason why the media gets a bad shake from the American people. That was a very deceitful thing that he did. He knows, based on my prior relationship with him.
Lots of reporters take phone calls.
George, I didn't say I didn't do the wrong thing. I want to be totally accountable for what I did. And obviously, I paid the consequences of having that sort of a conversation with him. But you know and I know that there are personal relationships. Howie Kurtz mentioned it on Media Buzz last week. He didn't need to do that to me. He knows he didn't do that to me.
He didn't have any personal relationship with you until he met you in the green room earlier this year.
Okay, that's a little bit of a stretch because we did have several conversations. His family knew my family for 50 years. It's a little bit of a stretch. We don't need to debate that anymore. That's past news. I made a mistake. I'm accountable for the mistake. I paid the consequences of that mistake. And, I was honorably dismissed, and I took it.
A lot of reports that the president's initial reaction to the phone call wasn't all that harsh. He was kind of amused by it and actually liked a lot of it.
Well, I got to let the president speak for that, but I think you have to understand something. There were probably one or two people that wanted me in that job, the president being one of them, and there were probably 200 people that didn't want me in that job. And so you know Washington as well as I know Washington. The odds were stacked against me in the job. And so there were leaks and there was a repetitive process to try to dislodge me. I made an unforced error that made it easy to dismiss me. And so, like I said, I accept it. What I did was wrong. But we have to move on, and I think the agenda that the American people want is middle class and lower income tax relief. I think they want the opportunity to see their wages grow, and I think the president stands for that. I think we have to put all of ourselves below that agenda. That agenda supersedes everybody else.
But you were pretty loyal to the president. Did he even call you to let you know?
I talked to the president this week. We had a very candid conversation. There's probably mutual disappointment on both sides. Again, I have to be accountable for what I did, and I am.
So you think you deserve to be fired for that?
Do I think I deserve to be fired? Well, obviously, I wish they would have given me a bar of soap and told me to go wash my mouth out in the bathroom and move on. I don't necessarily think it was going to be very hard for me to stay in the job, given the fact that General Kelly took over. And so I respect General Kelly. And so my feeling about the whole thing is that what happened was sort of meant to happen.
A couple of specific things in that phone call I want to follow up on. You talked about those digital fingerprints you got from the FBI and the DOJ. What are you talking about?
Because that was totally misconstrued.
Did you make it up?
No. All I was trying to say is that in the process, and I think Attorney General Sessions had said this, is that, and he also displayed that in his press briefing, is that over time, if the leaking continued, particularly the leaking that was against the
But you didn't have any digital fingerprints of people.
No. I was just implying that at some point, the Department of Justice would be able to figure out who the leakers are inside the national security system that are actually doing things that are against the law.
Right, but you had not received anything, because that would have been a felony from the person who gave it to you.
No, I didn't receive anything. No, we were, again, I thought that was an off-the-record conversation with somebody. It turned out that it wasn't. I own it, and let's move on.
You also, in that phone conversation, talked about Vice President Pence, and you were asked about his bringing in this political operative, Nick Ayers, to run his operation. And you told Ryan Lizza, Nick is there to protect the VP because the VP can't believe what the F is going on.
Yeah, okay, so let's talk about that, because that's also been misconstrued. You have to remember what Ryan Lizza did with his article. He wrote the article like I was unhinged and overly emotional and bombastic.
Well, it was your words, though.
Okay, but when you hear the tape, it's a very normal conversation. So the words were mischaracterized in the original article. He's mischaracterizing again.
He's not misquoting you, though.
He's not misquoting me, but he is mischaracterizing, because you know
he's just putting the words out there.
Okay, but George, there's a lot of difference between the lip and cup of substance and style. Okay, the way we're talking right now is actually the way I was talking to him. I thought it was off the record. We can. Well,
that's what I want to talk about the substance there. So what did you mean by the Vice President can't believe what the F is going on?
What I meant by that is that that he needed, in my opinion, he needed to fortify himself with somebody as talented as Nick Ayers, so that, the Vice President is an extremely loyal guy. I'm a huge fan of the Vice President. I wasn't recommending in that conversation that there was a breach or any daylight between the President and the Vice President. I'm a huge supporter of Vice President Pence and Nick Ayers, and all I meant was that Nick Ayers is a very strong political player. He was going to be in there to protect the Vice President. What do I mean by that? The Vice President wants to stay loyal to the President's agenda and to the President and his family, and Nick is a very smart, sophisticated strategist that will help him do that.
It sounds like you're
nothing more to it than that, George.
But it sounds like, and from your characterization now, that you really think this White House is something of a hornet's nest. Right now, you talk about leakers. You talk about people inside the White House who are there to protect the country from President Trump. Who'd you have in mind there?
Well, I think that, listen, I mean, you could agree with me or disagree with me. Even the president could disagree with me. But I think what happens in Washington, this is my general observation, is the president is not a representative of the political establishment class. And so for whatever reason, people have made a decision that they want to eject him. It's almost like he's opened up the door now for America's CEOs and America's billionaires to enter the Washington political system. The members of that political class do not like that. And it's not just an opening for President Trump, but it could be for a Mark Zuckerberg.
So he's fighting an enemy within the White
Iger.
House?
I think that there are elements inside of Washington, also inclusive in the White House, that are not necessarily abetting the president's interests or his agenda. I absolutely believe that, yes.
Name names.
Well, I named some names, and there's been some strategic changes, and my guess is there'll be more strategic changes. I think the president's getting his arms around the fact that if he wants to prosecute his agenda, he's got to bring in loyalists to him, and he's got to bring in, I think, a different strategy than the one they're deploying, because you've got 7 months now. He's done a tremendous amount. I think he's done way better in terms of progress as president than's been prominently displayed. And, you know, one of my heartbreaks is I wasn't able to effectively communicate that to the American people.
Reince Priebus is out. Sean Spicer is out. You think it appears that Steve Bannon is going to be out as well. You are out as well. That's led a lot of people, including Roger Stone, to characterize you as a political suicide bomber.
Yeah, I heard that, yeah. Well, listen, I saw it more as like Mr. Wolf from Pulp Fiction. You know, I really did get it directed from the president. I had a mutual understanding with him, and I was probably running too hard and acting more like a corporate CEO than I was, say, a political operative, and that's my mistake, and I have to own that. But, you know, listen, I've embraced the agenda. I grew up in a middle-class family. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood. I see the economic desperation and struggle of those people. The president has appropriately identified that. The reason why he won the presidency is that he wants his agenda to include and to lift up those people, George. And so for me, I went in there with my heart and soul. I'm a straight talking person. Did I make mistakes? Absolutely. But I enjoy being a straight-up guy today and in the future.
One of the things you advised President Trump against was firing Robert Mueller. Robert Mueller's investigation now a real threat to this White House. Just a report in the New York Times this morning that he's reaching into the White House for interviews with White House, current and former White House staffers.
I predict he will not find anything related to President Trump or his family as it relates to the Russia situation.
Was it a hard sell to convince the president not to fire Robert Mueller?
Not at all. I don't think he had any. I don't think he has any intention. I mean, I don't know, but I'm just.
But you talked to him about it.
I don't think he has any intention of firing Robert Mueller.
But when you were talking to him about it, he was musing about that. He was saying, "Boy, I think about it." You said you advised him against it.
I don't think so. I think he's just, again, he's a pretty much one of the things that the American people like about President Trump. He's pretty much an open book. I think the Twitter experience has exposed that he has an open book, hard on his sleeve nature. I don't think he wants to fire Robert Mueller, and I think he's very confident that Robert Mueller is not going to find anything related to him or his family or people in his inner circle.
He also told you, though, that it wasn't the Russians. The Russians didn't get into this interference because if they did, we wouldn't have known about it. And I think, you know, one of the things a lot of people wonder about, they saw the president this week refuse to criticize Vladimir Putin. They saw how tough he was, tougher on Mitch McConnell than he was on Vladimir Putin. They saw him yesterday not call out the white supremacists. How do you explain that reluctance, especially on Vladimir Putin? Why does he refuse to criticize Vladimir Putin?
Well, listen, again, this is my observation over 18 months working pretty closely in the campaign and then the few days I had in the administration. I think that the president's attitude is that he wants to have a good relationship with Vladimir Putin. A real reset to him would be to make that relationship friendlier, less hostile, and find common interests. And so some of the members of the media don't want him to do that, but I think that those are his instincts, and my guess is it will go directionally in a positive way.
It sounds like he's making excuses for Vladimir Putin.
See, I don't see it that way. I see it as a strong CEO that's now the American president that's making counterintuitive decisions that may not be liked by members of the media, but may be in the best interest of the people of the United States. And so I don't have an issue with that. I think with Senator McConnell, I think it's a different story there. I think all he's basically trying to say to the senator is we got to all get on side. We got to row the boat directionally in the same way. We want to get some huge legislative victories. The health care reform as an example, the tax relief and tax reform is another example of that. And we got to row the boat directionally in the same way. And so I think he's just, you know, it's almost like a football coach talking to one of the players on the team, and the president is he could be a tough coach at times, but I'll tell you what, the Republicans should be very happy that he's on their team because this guy's a winner.
Anthony Scaramucci, thanks.